Alright, so chapter 9.2, quadratic functions. Today what we're going to do is begin our work with graphing quadratic functions as well as identifying key properties of the functions. The graph of a quadratic function is called a parabola. A parabola is a U-shaped graph in which the middle point of that parabola is called the vertex. The vertex is the point where it's either here or there. Again, is where the parabola turns from going up to down or from going down to up. Again, the vertex of a parabola is either the highest point, which we call the maximum, or the lowest point, which we call the minimum of the parabola. A parabola is a symmetric shape, as you notice here, again, and even though mine aren't perfect, that you can cut them in half and it folds over itself, and you will be asked to identify the line of symmetry. That line of symmetry, again, represents the location in which the parabola is cut in half. So let's just get to it, some of the things you're going to be asked to do. One thing you're going to be asked to do is identify the key. The key x is the value of x that unlocks every part of the quadratic function. It's used as the centerpiece of a 5-point graphing chart, which we're going to do later. It's used to identify the axis of symmetry, which we talked about there. It's used to find the vertex. It's used to find the minimum or maximum. Pretty much at this, or as you work through this stuff, if you can't find the key correctly, then you don't even need to begin the problem, because there's no way you're going to get it right. Mainly because, as I said, the key is, it leads you to everything. So in terms of what you want to memorize or what you want to have written, and you have to memorize that the key x is x equals negative b over 2a, in which this just represents the opposite of b, and that represents you doubling a. However you remember that, just make sure you practice it, make sure you get good at it, and the better you get at it, the easier it's going to be for you later. Also, you want to memorize the negative b over 2a because it's going to be part of the quadratic formula, which you'll be learning about next week. Again, sometimes this can be a fraction, but for the most part, most of your work is going to have nice values of the key x. Because we are going to use this formula throughout our notes, I am not going to do an example just yet. I'm just going to go ahead and get into the stuff that you're going to be asked to do. One thing we're going to be asked to do is to find the vertex. The vertex represents an ordered pair. That means that you must identify an x and a y. Again, the key x does lead us to the value of y that we need. So let's just look at some examples. Again, if it says find the vertex of the parabola, the first thing we're going to do is find the key x by doing x equals negative b over 2a. Opposite of b means, since b here is negative 24, we want to put a positive 24 up top. 2a means double a. Since a is 3, that means we want a 6 on the bottom, meaning that my key x is 4. That is just the x. Remember, again, it's a ordered pair, so we also need a y. In order to do that, what we're going to do is take that 4 and plug it in to all your x's. And then when you type that into your calculator, that will lead you to your answer. Which is negative 46. And so your vertex is 4 comma negative 46. Again, that represents a point, not anything else. You need the ordered pair version of that for that to be a vertex. Again, you have to put that in an ordered pair to get that right. So again, you notice again the key x had to be found. Take the key x, plug it in, use that to identify your second point, and that is it. If you had this one here, again, you want your vertex, you simply go x equals negative b over 2a. B here is negative 10, which means that we want a positive 10. A here, if you remember, is negative 1. And if you double that, you end up with a negative 2, which means that my key x is 5, or negative 5. You then take that negative 5 and plug it in correctly to its place, typing it into your calculator to get the answer. Negative parentheses negative 5 squared minus 10 parentheses negative 5 plus 4 give me 29. And so your answer is negative 5 comma 29. That would be the vertex of that parabola. Part of your success is in understanding that the vertex is represented by two values. Many students accidentally give me the key x or they give me something else, and this is where your practice and mastery are necessary. In this chapter, if something is asked for, you have to make sure you give the answer in the proper form. And again, that means you have to actually practice it and study it and maybe take some notes or write some things down to try to make sure you get it right. Finding the axis of symmetry is something else we're going to do. The axis of symmetry is a line that, as I said, passes through the middle of the parabola. If you have a parabola that opens upwards, this would be your axis of symmetry. If you have a parabola that opens downwards, this would be the axis of symmetry. The equation for the axis of symmetry is always going to be x equals and then whatever your key x is. Alright? And you must always start with your equation if you're asking for the axis of symmetry with an x equals, otherwise it does not represent a line. The nice part about finding the axis of symmetry is that once you have the key x, your job is complete and there's nothing else to do, because if your key x is 6, you just put x equals 6. If your key x is negative 10, you simply put x equals negative 10. Again, though, this skill must be practiced and studied, which means you need to do some extra work, especially if you need to pass this class this time around. When quizzes and tests pop up, there are no half points for getting close. You must know what's expected of you in your answer, or you have to just retake the test. Let's look at some examples very briefly. Find the axis of symmetry for the quadratic function. Again, the first thing we have to do is find the key x, which is negative b over 2a. b here is 30, so we put negative 30 on top. a is negative 5. Doubling that, we get negative 10. Negative 30 divided by negative 10 is 3. That means that my axis of symmetry is x equals 3. Notice we didn't need to plug it in because we were not looking for the vertex or anything else. They wanted the axis of symmetry. Second one, find the axis of symmetry for x squared plus 14x minus 3. Again, the key x, negative b over 2a. b here is 14, so we want to switch that to be negative 14. a here is 1, so we want to make that doubled, which is 2, meaning that our key x here is negative 7, and that our answer is x equals negative 7. Easy enough to do. Again, you just got to make sure you take it seriously enough to practice it and be ready when the test pops or quizzes pop up. Finding the minimum or maximum value, the first job that must be mastered at this point is your ability to identify whether the parabola has a minimum or a maximum. This was learned in the first section of this chapter 9.1, so be sure to revisit those old notes for your information on that. Outside of understanding that, we only need to remember that the minimum or maximum is represented by the y variable here. The specific y variable that we need is the one that corresponds to the key x. So you'll see, again, since it is the key x that leads me to it, you will see me label this as y equals the key y. Again, the key y is the y that corresponds with the key x whenever you plug it in. So again, find the minimum or maximum is similar to finding the vertex. The only difference is your answer comes out differently in the end. Again, there is no half credit if you give the vertex as your answer. For example, if your key x is 2 and your key y is 4, and you simply give me 2, 4 as your answer for your maximum or minimum, that is wrong. That is a vertex to me. You need to put y equals 4 as your answer, because that is what the minimum or maximum is. So again, let's look at this real fast and just make sure we've got it, and then go from there. Find the minimum or maximum for each parabola. Here we have x equals negative b over 2a to start again. b here is negative 20, so we put a 20. a is 2, so we put a 4. Yes, and then we end up with 5 being our key x. We then take that 5 and plug it in to our calculator. And get negative 49. And again, this is the same work we did for the vertex. The only difference is now we want to just put y equals negative 49 as our answer there. Alright. Looking at a different one, again, x equals negative b over 2a. b here is negative 3, the opposite of b is 3. a is negative 4, the doubling of that gives us negative 8. This is just a fraction, not a big deal. We just have to make sure we know how to type fractions in to your calculator, which, based off of your training, I believe you do know how to type fractions into your calculator, and it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Just make sure you type in what you see. So negative 4 parentheses negative 3 divided by 8 squared minus 3 parentheses negative 3 divided by 8 plus 2. And of course we don't want a decimal, we want a fraction, so you hit math, enter, enter, getting 41 over 16. And because this is a minimum or a maximum, your answer is y equals 41 over 16. Keep in mind that whenever you want to know if it's a minimum or a maximum, that makes a sad parabola, which means that this is a max. Whereas the other one, if it was positive, makes a happy parabola, and that makes this a minimum. Alright. Last thing you're going to be asked to do is create a 5-point chart. In order to graph a quadratic function, you must be able to identify the points that create the parabola. We will use a 5-point chart to graph the parabolas. Although we'll learn later that we only need 3 points in your assessments, or your assessments are going to simply ask for a 5-point chart or a graph. But even if it asks for a graph, you have to make your 5-point chart for any credit. So again, just get used to making those 5-point charts. In order to do that, 4 things you want to do. First off, find the key x, place it in the middle of the x values, surround it with the values that are adjacent, which means next to it, and then of course plug the values in to find the corresponding y values. It's actually pretty simple to do, and we're just going to look at some examples and close up this video so that we can get to work. So looking at this, if you want a 5-point chart, again, notice again we have to start with negative b over 2a, which since b is negative 180, we put 180 on top. A is 9, doubling that gives us 18, and simplifying that gives us the answer of 10. So you make a 5-point chart by putting 5 lines and put 10 in the center of those 5 lines. Adjacent numbers to 10 above it is 9 and 8. After 10 goes 11 and 12. So that's really not that bad. You just pick the numbers next to it. Getting the numbers outside of that, you simply do 9 parentheses 8 squared minus 180 parentheses 8 plus 6, which gives us negative 858. Keep in mind that the way you get this back is by hitting second enter, and then go back and turn those 8s into 9s, giving us negative 885. Bringing that back, what we do is go ahead and turn that 9 into a 10. That does take a little bit of work because you have to actually insert by hitting second delete. If you have not tried that out, you need to try to kind of play around with that on your calculator. Again, second delete changes your cursor, allows you to insert a spot, hit the arrow to take the cursor back to a regular one, and go from there. But you do get negative 894. Changing 10 to 11 by using second enter again gives us a negative 885, and then changing 11 to 12 gives us negative 858. Now remember, we said that a parabola is symmetric, and so what you should always have, if you did your table right, is a rainbow of matches, as I like to say. If you can't draw lines to match negative 858 to negative 858, negative 885 to negative 885, this value here represents your vertex. That is your axis of symmetry. That is your minimum / maximum value. So again, all the information is easy to find. You just have to make sure you practice enough to make sure you know what you are doing. Now make sure your calculator is ready on this one, because I'm going to show you another shortcut that your calculator has, at least in graphing calculators, to where you can make your work a little more simple than what we've been doing. Negative 6 is my b, so again we put a 6 up there. A is negative 1, so we're going to put a negative 2, which gives us the key x of negative 3. So negative 3 goes in the middle, negative 2, negative 1, negative 4, and negative 5. This time what I'm going to do is actually graph it. So of course I taught you how to graph this. You go to your y equals, you type in your negative x squared minus 6x plus 1, and you graph it. Once that graph is complete, what you do is you hit second trace and you select value. That means we're looking for a certain value, and you know that it asks us for what x we are looking for. And so you simply type in the x's that you're looking for. Notice that when I type in negative 1, it tells me that my y is 6. All I have to do now is go back and type in negative 2. It tells me that my y is 9. Type in negative 3. Going back to the graph, I guess. Second trace, value, negative 3. Tells me that my y is 10. Negative 4 tells me that my y is 9, which we need to have for that match. And then negative 5 tells me that my y is 6. So again, you have a rainbow of matches. If you cannot draw that line, you did not do it right. Just to make sure, you have to ask questions. When you get to graphing questions on your Math Excel assignment, be sure to get assistance. I would answer your question now, but again, I truly believe that students need to learn to seek out information. So go ahead and begin work on today's assignment. And again, ask about anything going on. This is a very, I don't think it's extremely simple, but I think it's straightforward where everything just kind of repeats itself. So get ready for that, and let's move on. Your quiz on this is Friday. Good luck.